You're listening to a CNA podcast.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
So now we have a new victim to defeat. Lion Kamala Harris. Lion, L-Y-I-N apostrophe.
So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
I'm Arnold Gay, and this is the CNA Correspondent podcast. It's less than 7 days to the US presidential election, and we seem to be, well, about where we were roughly 3 months ago when current leader Joe Biden stepped aside. As we know, his VP, Kamala Harris, quickly won the Democratic Party's nomination. But after an early spike in the polls for Ms. Harris, many surveys suggest it's a dead heat between her and the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. There's been a lot to digest. A debate in September that many say Ms. Harris won. Military leaders who serve under Mr. Trump sounding the alarm about a second presidency, a second assassination attempt against the GOP leader, and ever darker language and erratic behavior from him as the nominees focus their time, energy, and finances on a handful of crucial swing states. Joining me on the show this week are Simon Marks, who heads up our bureau in Washington, D.C., and Sally Patterson, who's been busy traveling around the United States, meeting and talking to voters. Sally and Simon, good to have you both on the show.
Good to see you, Arnold.
Good to be here.
Simon, let's start with you. Is there an easy way to explain why nothing seems to move the needle in this knife-edge contest?
Yes, this is a 50-50 country, and it's been a 50-50 country for a while. It is, as you know, a completely polarized nation, and politics here has become extraordinarily tribal compared certainly to the way politics was when I first arrived. I do think that the race has changed since Joe Biden exited and abandoned his decision to seek re-election, because it didn't feel as competitive a race as this one has become. Certainly when we were all at the Republican convention in Milwaukee back in July, the Republicans felt absolutely, supremely optimistic that they were going to waltz to victory over Joe Biden, and possibly with good reason. But when Kamala Harris became the Democratic Party's presidential nominee, she reversed the deficit in the opinion polls that Joe Biden was suffering against Donald Trump, and actually for a while took a lead over him. And there are some polls that still indicate that she has that lead going into what we still call Election Day, even though really it's the day on which the election ends, because early voting has been underway in so many states for, in many cases, weeks now. So it has become a much more competitive race with her entrance to it, and grassroots Democrats were feeling pretty grim about their prospects with Joe Biden as the candidate, and suddenly felt anything is possible when she became the nominee. But the reason why it's deadlocked and we all could foresee any outcome when the votes are counted is fundamentally because this is now a 50-50 nation in which there is very little middle ground, very few undecideds that make the difference in all of these presidential elections that we cover.
Simon, it's still down to 7 key swing states. So which are they? And surely they all cannot be equally important. Which states are the must-wins for both nominees?
Well, the nominees will tell you they're all must-wins. I mean, the 7 states are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And close observers of this campaign will have noticed that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have barely set foot outside those states, with a few exceptions, in the closing weeks of the race. And that's because these battleground states, swing states they're suddenly called, are states that sometimes choose a Democrat for the White House, sometimes choose a Republican for the White House, but always end up making the big difference in terms of determining the outcome of the race. Now, there are some states that we used to think of as swing states. Florida, for example, traditionally was thought of as a swing state. The Republican presence there is so dominant in elected politics now that the Democrats have largely given up on it. So it's no longer considered must win in the way that it used to be. I would say that from Kamala Harris's perspective, the 3 really must-win states are Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. She needs to win at least 2 of them, and that is why she has relentlessly been focusing on those states. If you're Donald Trump, you're looking more closely at places like Arizona. It's a border state. Immigration, a big issue there. That's a must-win for him. North Carolina, I think he would argue, is a must-win for him. But when we say must-win, it all relates to the Electoral College, that extraordinary middleman created by the American Constitution that sits between the voters and the outcome of this election. You've got to end up with 270 votes to have a majority in the Electoral College. And that's why this is all really about electoral maths. And so the campaigns, the pundits, all of us reporters, we're going to be sitting here on election night, poring over maps and statistics and doing mental arithmetic and sums on our computers and on our chalkboards in a bid to see which particular array of states the winning candidate is able to put together in order to get past 270 votes in the Electoral College.
Simon, when you say close, how close are we talking about? Do you have some numbers? I guess in the sense, how many voters are possibly going to separate the winner from the loser?
It's tiny numbers, Arnold, and it's been tiny numbers. It was tiny numbers when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in 2016, tiny numbers in 2020. There are estimates that only about 43,000 votes moving from Trump to Biden made the difference in some of those key swing states, which is why you see this absolutely fevered effort to try and win over any undecided voters. And this time round, because Donald Trump is so obviously known to the public, and Kamala Harris has had to engage in the political equivalent of speed dating with the American public over the last few weeks, but because people have such opinions already about Donald Trump, it's almost hard to imagine that there are undecided voters out there. So the numbers this time round could be even narrower than they were in the past. But I will also say it is very hard to have much confidence in some of these opinion poll results that we're seeing. And it's perfectly possible that one candidate or another might easily and handily win this election and take us all by surprise, and the margins might not be that razor thin.
Sally, I think it's a good time to bring you in, what the polls are saying and what you actually learned, because you've traveled to the swing states of Nevada, Arizona, you were in Utah as well, meeting and talking at some length with voters. What did you see? What did you learn? Are people relaxed or are they stressed? Are families fighting, not talking about the election in general? I mean, what did you see?
Well, Arnold, I was sent specifically looking around the country at how women are going to vote in this upcoming election. We know that this is a really important election for women in particular. They've got a lot at stake here. And all of those things you listed, yes, I saw it all. I saw infighting, I saw panic, I saw anxiety, I saw excitement, I saw hope, lots of different feelings from across the country, and really a lot being put on November 5th. Now, some of the key issues that we were looking at as we went around the country were abortion, which is perhaps one of the most synonymous words with this election. We've heard it for years and years now, since Roe v. Wade 2 years ago, and now it has really become at the very centre of this election. I was also looking at childcare costs, which is a key issue facing many families here. Of course, not just women, but women are often the ones who bear the brunt of that childcare labour, and also the ones who end up getting paid less because of it. And I was also looking at this growing ideological gap between young men and women, and people had a lot that they wanted to share with me as I went from Utah down to Nevada and over to Arizona, some of those really important swing states in this election.
Sally, tell us a bit more about this growing gender divide. Why are men, and we hear it's especially younger men, who are now leaning towards Mr. Trump? Is it some of the recent locker room humor that we've heard that was focused on the late Arnold Palmer's anatomy, along with Trump's penchant for profanity? And why is Miss Harris winning with women as well?
Well, Arnold, this is actually a growing international trend, this gap that we're seeing between men going right and women turning left. We're seeing this in Europe, we're seeing it here, and in this election it's particularly pronounced. Donald Trump has been courting the so-called bro vote. Basically, he's trying to get younger men who may not vote otherwise to come out and cast their ballots. He's turning up at sports events. He's turning up in podcasts, other ways that are not just the usual campaigning podium to try and get his message out there. And it seems to be working. Young men are really resonating with what he's got to say. They like, for example, that he's a businessman. They think he's going to create a stronger economy. They look back at the economy under him the first time round and they say, that's what we want to get back to. That was what we see as a strong economic situation for America. They also think that he's going to put America back on the international stage. They perceive the Democrats as being weaker in that space. They look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan, for example, and they see embarrassment there. They look at world trade as well. And what they really want to see is going back to what they see as a very strong international platform. Now, I was also speaking to women, and this generation of women, Gen Z women in particular, are the most progressive group we've ever seen here in the US. They are moving further and further left, and Kamala Harris is undeniably helping to drive that shift. Many of them who I spoke to in Utah said when President Joe Biden stepped down as the nominee or the prospective nominee and handed over to Harris instead, they felt renewed optimism in the future of the Democrats, and they really wanted to get out there, knocking on doors and getting people involved. Now, I spoke to Audrey Evans. She is from Women for Kamala. She was helping organize events in Utah. And here's what she told me.
Women have the power to do a lot more of the negotiating, of the compromising, of building unity, bringing people together.
Now, that's a very different perspective to some of the people who I met further outside of the more progressive Salt Lake City. I went to Cedar City as well to speak to some Trump campaigners there. They'd all gathered for a big truck rally, and they really think that Donald Trump is the man to bring America back to a great and masculine place. I spoke to Greg Roback, and here's what he told me.
He's got guts and he's got grit, and he literally is, in my opinion, the only thing standing in the way of them taking over what we all have known to grow and love here.
Now, very different perspectives there, as you can hear, and it's all going to really play out in a matter of days. We'll have a sense of which of those is going to be strongest when it actually comes to voter turnout.
And when it comes to reproductive rights, why is Arizona at the center of this battle?
Well, the Democrats have really put reproductive rights at the very center of their campaign. Kamala Harris has been talking about it for several years, far before she became the official Democrat nominee. Now it's right at the front and center of her and Walz's campaign as well. They're the most pro-choice campaign we've ever seen in this country. It's really one of the most divisive issues here. We're hearing about it pretty much in every state. In Arizona, it's particularly of interest because abortion is literally on the ballot. As well as voting for the president in November, voters there are going to get to choose whether they want to change the Constitution to enshrine abortion rights into those. And that's particularly crucial to many of them after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which enshrined it across the whole country. Now it's being left to states to decide themselves. Now, I went to an abortion clinic, a Planned Parenthood in Glendale, Arizona, and I met some of the campaigners standing outside, basically saying that there were murders going on inside that clinic and they want to see a total ban carried out both in Arizona and across the country. Here's what Julie Fletcher told me.
They've already messed up the country, as you can see, too. So they're not going to protect life at all. So, yeah, I'm definitely voting for Trump, but they're even getting washy just because they know that it's a hot issue. They're dancing around the verbiage, but if anybody's going to protect life, he's going to do it for sure.
Now, there are also women campaigning relentlessly on the other side. I went and met with Morgan Finkelstein. She had a selective reduction a couple of years ago, which is a type of abortion when one of her fetuses was not viable. I met her with her 4-year-old daughter, who was thankfully born healthily. But she says that there are women like her who would be at risk today if they needed to go through the same type of procedure. And now she really hopes that Harris being put into office is going to protect women like herself. Here's what she had to say.
I really admire Kamala Harris, and I believe her when she says that she wants to protect women and she wants to restore abortion rights. And I could not be more excited about her becoming our president.
A very emotive issue playing out across the country, and likely an issue that people are going to be voting on November 5th and before that.
Simon, perhaps this is the time to kind of do a mini summary, if that's the right word for it. Mr. Trump, reports have it, as the edge on the economy, Harris winning on women's health. Where are Americans on immigration? How are they reacting to Trump's claims about migrants eating pets in Ohio, for example, and also comments like this one?
Crime in this country is through the roof, and we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime.
Well, it's just worth making the point, Arnold, first of all, that it's confounding to Democrats that Donald Trump has an edge on the economy, because in the closing days of this campaign, the IMF has again said that the United States is the fastest performing economy in the developed world, that productivity and output are up. We're seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P reaching record levels. So it's deeply disappointing to Democrats that so many voters say they simply don't feel the fruits of Joe Biden's success with the economy. So that is confounding to them, but also deeply confounding to them the progress and the focus that Donald Trump has placed on immigration. Immigration is Kamala Harris's Achilles heel. It is the Democrats' most vulnerable issue because they now themselves concede that there is a crisis on America's southern border with Mexico. For the first 2.5 years of the Biden administration, they insisted there was no crisis and that Republicans were simply amping this up as a populist issue to try and excite the appetites of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again supporters. But as the number of illegal immigrants, undocumented aliens, continued to rise coming into the country, as some of those illegal immigrants found themselves accused of committing really appalling acts of violence, several murders in various parts of the state. Not only did Republicans find that they were absolutely pushing at an open door with their own supporters, but the White House itself had to concede that this was indeed a crisis. And Joe Biden is under pressure, and Kamala Harris is therefore under pressure because he asked her, in essence, to place an enormous amount of her focus as vice president on the immigration issue, liaising with neighboring countries, sending a message to people south of the United States not to come to the United States. Both of them find themselves accused essentially of having frittered away opportunities early in their administration to take the problem seriously and do something about it. And now Kamala Harris finds herself under pressure from the left of the Democratic Party because many of the policies that she is expected to implement if she becomes president of the United States are ripped out of Donald Trump's playbook. So if there is one major issue fueling Donald Trump's success in the polls, it's probably immigration more even than the issue of the economy. But the Republicans have certainly succeeded in making immigration a very positive issue for them on the doorstep.
Simon, in the past weeks, in particular the past fortnight, Ms. Harris has done more high-profile interviews, even going on Fox News, for example, going after Republicans, while Trump himself has upped his campaign rallies and focus on low-propensity voters. Now, what are low-propensity voters, first of all? And are there signs that these efforts are working? Are voters now paying more attention?
Well, I think there's no question that voters are paying more attention to the campaign. That is traditional, right? We're all very excited about it from its first stirrings over a year ago, but most voters generally tune in after the Labor Day holiday at the end of the summer here in the United States, and that's been true of this campaign. Those low propensity voters, and both sides are trying to reach them, they're voters that often don't show up at the polls, that often sit elections out, and both parties are concerned that there is so much disillusion with both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris that there could be a number of voters who either choose not to bother to vote or cast their ballots in favour of third-party candidates. And don't rule out the importance of third-party candidates like Jill Stein of the Green Party in some of those crucial battleground states, Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party's candidate, in some of those states where we could really see sort of a 50-50 split between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Those third-party candidates may end up siphoning votes away that leave them essentially the kingmaker in determining who wins. wins. As far as the respective media strategies are concerned, they've both been giving a large number of interviews, but Kamala Harris has also, of course, like Donald Trump, been trying to reach her grassroots supporters through podcasts friendly to her and friendly to him. That's become a common denominator between the two of them over the course of the last few weeks.
Well, Simon, they say all politics is local, but surely what's happening in the Middle East is complicating the situation for Harris in particular?
Yeah, no question about that, especially in Michigan. Large Arab American vote in Michigan. It is a must-win battleground state for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and we are seeing record numbers of Arab American voters saying that they are not willing to back the Democratic nominee. And one of the big stories, I think, of election night is what happens in Michigan, given all of that anger among the Arab American community towards Kamala Harris's and Joe Biden's handling of the crisis in Gaza. It really could be a significant political problem for her.
Sally, I want to leave the final question to you because this is about that elusive swing voter, that low propensity voter, which has been described as someone who perhaps doesn't like Trump, but agrees with his views on the economy and on immigration, but at the same time likes Harris and wants abortion rights. I believe you've met some. What did they say specifically about when they will decide on whether it's going to be Harris or Trump?
Well, usually the voices that we're hearing in the media is people who feel very strongly one way or the other. They're definitely voting Republican or they're definitely voting Democrat. And the reality is there are many people who are somewhere in the middle, especially with the two very different candidates that we've got. They're offering a very different vision of the country to voters. And those voters are trying to work out which way they'd like to see the country go. Now, when I was speaking to men in particular, there was something about the strong sense that Donald Trump was pitching out that appealed to them. But others I spoke to didn't like Donald Trump so much as a person, but they did like what he was promising. They did like the idea of a strong country. They liked the idea of a strong American business structure. They liked the idea of putting America back on the international stage. They didn't necessarily want to invite Donald Trump over to the house for a dinner party, but they did want to see him back in the White House. Now, with women, I had a different image. I spoke to them about the idea of having the first black woman president that this country's ever seen. Some of them felt incredibly excited by that prospect. Others felt that was much less important than what she was pitching out to the country. Now, I spoke to Nevaeh Williams. She was a mum in Nevada. She was looking after her son by herself, and she told me that she just wasn't sure yet.
If I had to pick to be anybody, maybe her, to be honest. But they say a lot of things and then things don't change, so we'll just have to see.
Now, many mums and others I spoke to are just like Nevaeh. They are going to be waiting to see what continues to come out over the next few days. They're going to see which of those candidates does end up really cutting through the noise, appealing to them on the issues that they care about most.
And Sally, not a stretch to say that most of these undecided voters may decide on the day itself as they drive to the voting centers, the polling centers, and as they head into the booths?
I think that's completely right. I think there will be people who are making that decision as they walk up to make their ballot. I would also say that there are families who are going to be going into this deciding very different things when it comes to actually casting their vote. This race is literally dividing couples. For example, the women thinking very strongly that they want to see Kamala Harris in the White House, and the men thinking that Donald Trump is the only option to make America great again. Those couples, I'm sure, are going to be having many loud, argumentative dinners ahead of the election, and many people, I'm sure, will breathe a sigh of relief when one way or another the vote is decided after November 5th.
Sally and Simon, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Arnold.
Thank you so much.
And that is the CNA Correspondent podcast this week. A reminder, you can catch reports from all our correspondents on CNA's YouTube channel and CNA.Asia. And also note, the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. The team behind this week's edition is Saye Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, Tiffany Ang, and myself, Arnold Gay. Thank you very much for joining us.